Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening up our research roadmap for something huge, way bigger, and honestly more complicated than most people think. Recreational fisheries management. We're diving into this 2020 paper. It's called Preparing for a Changing Future in Recreational Fisheries. 100 research questions for global consideration emerging from a Horizon scan, led by Peter E. Holder and a really impressive international team. You know, when we talk about recreational angling, maybe you picture someone just relaxing by a lake, but the scale, it's genuinely stunning. We're talking estimates like up to 700 million anglers around the world.
700 million, wow.
Yeah, and all that fishing drives an economic engine, something like 190 billion US dollars in activity worldwide.
Yeah.
So this isn't just a weekend hobby, you know? It's this massive global industry, huge environmental footprint, huge social footprint too.
Exactly. And that sheer size means the challenges are just as big. Recreational fisheries are, well, they're classic examples of what we call coupled social ecological systems. What that means is they depend completely on the natural world, right? The fish, their habitats. But just as much, they depend on people, human behavior, economies, policies. And now these systems are really feeling the pressure of the Anthropocene. You know, this era where human activity is basically the main driver of environmental change. The threats are, well, many. You got habitat loss, climate change, sometimes overfishing in certain spots. But what's really interesting now, I think, is how the complexity has shifted. Managers today, they also have to deal with these rapidly changing cultural things, like growing public concern over animal welfare, big ethical debates around whether fish feel pain, that sort of thing.
Right, so the stakes are incredibly high and all these problems are tangled together, which is why this paper is so important, really. Our mission today, for you listening, is to pull out the most critical, maybe the most surprising questions from that list of 100. Questions that experts worldwide agree need answers if this whole sector is going to adapt, survive, and stay sustainable, you know, in a world that's changing so fast. This is basically the research checklist for the next decade or two.
That's a great way to put it, a checklist. And the way they got this list, the methodology, gives it real weight. They used what's called a horizon scanning exercise, specifically the 100 questions exercise. It's actually a pretty popular strategy and effective for finding research gaps and spotting what's coming next in different fields. Conservation uses it, health policy.
And crucially, this wasn't just academics talking to each other, right?
No, definitely not.
They started by gathering, what was it, 205 initial questions from a really broad mix of people, stakeholders, managers, researchers, and look at the countries involved. USA, Canada, Brazil, Norway, South Africa, Australia. I mean, it was properly global, 14 countries.
Yeah, they made a point of reaching out to everyone involved. Government folks, academics, sure, but also fishing guides, people in the industry, even just regular anglers. So once they had those 205 raw questions, the authors put in serious time. They grouped them, found themes, and refined that list down to the final 100. And a key part of that refinement was rigor. The final questions couldn't just be interesting ideas to ponder. They had to be, well, answerable, meaning you could actually do research to find an answer. And the answers had to be useful, something that could genuinely inform policy or conservation work in the real world. That makes this list incredibly practical, really actionable.
So when you look at the final list, these 100 questions grouped into 10 themes, what really jumps out is, wow, the future of fishing seems less about the fish themselves and much more about us, about human behavior. It really drives home that fisheries management is maybe primarily about managing people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The social complexity is undeniable. Just look at the human dimensions theme. That had 15 critical questions digging deep into public perception. For example, one question asks, how do we figure out what drives anti-fishing feelings among the public? And how widespread is it? And then crucially, how will those changing views actually impact the future? Politically, legislatively, for recreational fishing.
That's a huge strategic question, isn't it? It's basically saying, look, public acceptance isn't just nice to have anymore. It might be a survival issue for this huge industry. The pressure isn't just protests. It could be actual laws changing. If public opinion shifts hard, that $190 billion economy is suddenly at risk. They need to measure that risk.
Totally. And tied right into that is this question about the consequences of different views on fish pain. You know, if the public or policymakers start leaning heavily towards believing fish feel pain like mammals do, versus being skeptical, how does management have to change? Fundamentally, that's a really deep ethical challenge they're putting out there for researchers to tackle, to quantify even.
Yeah, and something else that surprised me actually were the questions looking at the positive side, the public benefit. They specifically asked about using recreational fishing to help with health and wellness.
Uh,
Like, how can fishing be promoted for kids at risk or people with special needs or folks dealing with PTSD or mental health issues? It sort of reframes fishing potentially as a kind of social therapy, a public health asset.
That holistic view is so important. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. From the social side to the economic structure, that's covered in the bioeconomics theme, which had 11 questions. And this part gets, well, pretty theoretically dense, but really interesting stuff.
Right. This is where we might need a quick translation for listeners. There's one question trying to figure out what really drives the value of a fishing trip. They ask how much of the angler surplus, which is basically the satisfaction or benefit an angler gets beyond what they actually paid for the trip.
The enjoyment factor, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How much of that comes from the natural capital, the fish stocks themselves, versus the produced capital, the fancy gear, the boat,
Hmm.
or even the human capital, the angler's own skill?
That's a fundamentally tricky economic question, isn't it? They're trying to measure how much value comes from the ecosystem versus how much comes from you, the angler, and your stuff. It really challenges how we usually think about it. They also ask about things like congestion. Does seeing 20 other boats out there ruin your day?
Or the opposite, maybe. Agglomeration, like does fishing with others, the social aspect, actually increase the value for some people?
Cooperation versus competition.
And here's the regulatory idea that really grabbed me. They ask about the theoretical challenge, get this, of putting a complex catch-share regulation regime into a recreational fishery.
Wait, catch shares, like they use in big commercial fisheries,
Hmm.
where specific users get a quota.
Exactly.
For recreational anglers, for
Yeah.
someone just going out for the weekend, that sounds incredibly complicated. Is that actually feasible or just a thought experiment?
I think it's definitely testing the boundaries, but it shows how seriously they're considering complex tools, maybe for specific high-pressure situations, like near cities where fishing pressure is intense. It's way beyond just setting a bag limit. Okay, so speaking of complexity, to track all this economic value and the fish stocks, you need solid data, right? Which brings us to the challenges in resource monitoring and data acquisition.
Yeah, this theme, with its 11 questions, really highlights how much potential there still is with modern tech. A lot of these questions are about how technology, things like smartphone apps, social media, could seriously improve the amount and the quality of data coming directly from anglers. They're imagining a future with much more active management, maybe specific rules for specific lakes or rivers, where technology allows for mandatory real-time reporting. Imagine logging your catch on an app, and the system instantly adjusts the daily limit for everyone else on that water body.
That sounds amazing, potentially. But as the paper points out, it all hinges on solving that fundamental problem, data quality.
Absolutely critical.
If you automate management based on what the public reports, you have to trust that data implicitly. The experts flag this persistent issue, dealing with people who don't report, or data gaps or biases in self-reported voluntary data.
That trust is everything.
So that transition from data to actually doing something leads us right into management regulatory actions. Another 11 questions here, really stressing the need for evidence before we change the rules. We can't just keep doing things the way we always have.
Precisely. They want to move beyond just simple size limits and bag limits. The paper explicitly asks about the pros and cons of newer ideas, like harvest tags or quotas or harvest slots.
Right, a harvest slot, maybe you can only keep fish between, say, 15 and 20 inches, protects the small ones and the big, crucial breeders.
Exactly. And connecting back to the people side of things, they're asking a really critical question. How does making regulations more complex affect whether people start fishing, keep fishing,
Yeah.
or just give up?
Yeah, if the rules get too complicated, people might just say, forget it.
Yeah,
Imagine needing a lawyer to figure out the rules just to catch a bass on Saturday. That's a huge barrier.
definitely. And there's also a big push in these questions to shift away from just managing one species at a time, like just focusing on trout. They want regulations that protect whole ecosystems and also the human communities that depend on them. Much broader thinking.
So while managing the rules and the people is key, we obviously can't forget the direct impact on the fish themselves. Which brings us to themes like catch and release, or CNR, and the wider impacts on populations, communities, and ecosystems.
Right. The CNR theme has 8 questions. It really emphasizes that we need to understand the longer-term effects of releasing a fish. It's not just about whether it swims away okay right then. Does the stress affect its breeding later? Are there effects passed down to the next generation, impacting their fitness? We need to know that.
And in the broader impacts theme, they pose this really crucial comparison. How likely is it that recreational fishing causes recruitment overfishing compared to commercial fishing? We need clarity on that risk. Recruitment overfishing, just quickly, is when you fish so hard that there aren't enough adults left to produce enough young fish to keep the population going.
Yet, if weekend anglers are actually capable of causing that on a large scale, that requires some radical rethinking of management.
Definitely.
And they also get into this fascinating ecological consequence, how recreational fishing might actually be driving evolution in fish. Think about it. Angling pressure is a form of selection. If anglers consistently take out the biggest, boldest fish,
Right.
over time, you could be selecting for populations that are smaller, maybe shyer, maybe reproduce earlier. That's a fundamental change to the wild population driven by us.
Wow. Okay, so finally, the list loops back to those big picture issues of the Anthropocene with themes on governance and threats and sustainability. The governance questions, there are 8 of them. They look at stability, like how can we structure fisheries management so it's less vulnerable to shifting political winds or short-term societal pressures?
Basically, how do you keep policy science-based and stable, not just bouncing around with every election cycle?
Exactly. And the 9 sustainability questions, they tackle emerging threats that hit close to home for people.
For instance, they ask, are people being exposed to harmful levels of toxins, things like heavy metals, microplastics, when they eat the fish they catch, now or in the future?
That question connects the health of the river directly to your family's health, right? It makes the issue very personal, not just abstract ecology. It's about safety.
Absolutely. And looking back at the study itself, the authors were upfront about its limitations. The survey was only done in English, and the way they sent it out relied a lot on their own networks, conference lists.
So potentially missing perspectives from non-English speaking anglers,
Yeah,
especially maybe in the developing world.
exactly. That's a gap they acknowledge. But those limitations don't really take away from the main goal here. This list provides this incredibly comprehensive, forward-looking framework. It's designed to guide global research for years to come.
And its sheer breadth, I mean, covering natural science, social science, ethics, economics, it just shows that sustainable fisheries management has to be fully integrated now.
That really is the key takeaway for you, the listener. It's not enough anymore to just tweak a size limit here or there. Sustainable management means weaving together natural sciences, social sciences, even the humanities to support economies, support human well-being, and protect ecosystem services, all at the same time.
It's a huge task.
It is. And that leads to maybe a final provocative thought for you to chew on, building on what we've discussed. Given all those complexities in the human dimensions, especially the anti-fishing sentiments, the ethical debates about fish feeling pain, how should managers actually balance trying to maximize angler satisfaction? Remember that $190 billion economy with these growing ethical concerns and public perception issues, all while still keeping things ecologically sustainable.
That tension
Yeah.
between the economy, the ethics, and the ecology, that feels like it's going to define policy debates for decades. Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us as we explored the future of recreational fisheries research.